Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're at Pep Talks. My name is Leon Theodore. I'm the host. Um, and tonight we have Leonard Chello Webb joining us, and we're talking about ending the school to prison pipeline. The disparities in our school discipline system, both nationally and here in Dallas, call attention to the need for change in our school culture. The use of zero tolerance practices and the over disciplining of youth of color, specifically Black youth, have continued the flow of Black boys and girls into the school to prison pipeline. Our educational system spends vast amounts of money for security services and minuscule amounts comparatively on the mental and emotional well-being of our youth. Systemic racism, racist practices, and policies have impacted communities of color, but specifically Black communities, creating wealth and achievement gaps that spill into our school system. Implicit bias, a lack of cultural awareness, consistently criminalize Black student behavior while dismissing and minimizing the same behavior in other students. Zero tolerance policies and practices are proven not to change students' behavior, but increase aggression and disengage youth from the learning process. Learning is not one size fits all. Moving our educational culture from deficit thinking toward a whole child approach is the goal of PrEP. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm going to allow Mr. Webb to introduce himself. Mr. Webb, do that for me, please, sir.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Leonard Chello Webb. I'm an educational consultant with Webvolutionary Motivation LLC. I help educators challenge their implicit bias, and I help students achieve academic success so they can avoid the criminal justice system. I've been doing this for the past 3 years. I had spent 27 years as a professional in law enforcement. Um, so that's what I've been doing the last 3 years, working with school systems and administrators to improve the school culture and increase attendance and decrease expulsions and suspensions.
Thank you for that. This is good that we have this. We have you on board today. A lot of talk is about SROs and school police, defunding the police. It'll be good to get a perspective from someone that's been in that area and now change. So I'll start off with this. What made you change? What made you change your field?
Well, while I was working in the prison system, I was also working as an adjunct faculty member at a local university. And what I began to see was the same young men that were coming into my classroom were coming into my office at the prison. And I began to ask the question, why? And what I began to find out is that the young men that were coming into my office at the prison had a lot of misdiagnosed mental illness or undiagnosed mental illnesses and undiagnosed learning disabilities. While the students that were coming into my college classroom, they seemed to have, if they had any issues, had interventions at an early age. There was one that he was seen as, he had ADHD, but he was seen as being exceptionally smart. So they moved him up because they felt like he wasn't being challenged. While a young man that came into the prison system had the same issue and he was pushed out. And it began to make me wonder, had this young man not been pushed out of school, would he be in my college classroom as well, or somebody else's college classroom? And that's when I started to think, there is a connection between the two.
Thank you. That's a good perspective. So I'm going to follow off of that. Can should we have should we have SROs, and should our SROs have as much interaction with students as they do?
Here's the issue with SROs. And I know there are a lot of SROs that do a lot of good work in schools. I'm not going to say that, that all SROs are bad, but basically is what is happening is the SROs are placed in schools. And as a law enforcement professional, we have no idea about childhood development. We have no idea about child learning. It's not in our forte. And SROs are being brought into schools as a form of classroom management, as a form of It's not the original purpose of the SRO was to be there as a good role model. They weren't to interfere with disciplinary issues. And what happened was they were brought into schools because of school shootings, but they got involved with disciplinary issues. And all of a sudden now we have zero tolerance policies. And as a law enforcement professional, you're not thinking about childhood brain development. You're really just thinking about as it from a law enforcement lens. And on top of that, you have principals that don't own their building. Like that's your building. The SRO works for you when he gets there. He should know your educational philosophy. He should know, when he's supposed to do something. And the teachers shouldn't be using them as classroom management tools. They're the professionals. And that's not what's happening. They're being used for disciplinary issues, and they have a particular lens that they view things through, which includes restraint, which includes, arresting. And this is happening in our schools.
Man, so I'm going to have to continue with that. We've got some other questions that we talked about, but I'm going to have to continue with that. So do you think, I'm just going to ask you flat out, should we have FROs on our campuses?
No. The money, and people view the defund police in the wrong way. And it's not that if you remove the SROs, these guys won't have jobs. No, they'll still work for the police department. The SRO money is coming from somewhere else. They're not losing their jobs if they're not an SRO. So that's the first myth that's out there. Counselors need to be in the schools. The money that they spend on SROs could easily be changed over to hiring more counselors. And the fact of the matter is, there is no evidence that shows SROs have dissuade a police shooting anyway in the schools. There's no, if you see the police shootings that have been stopped, one was stopped in Seattle by a football coach because there's a relationship there. You're not going to be able to stop somebody that is put in their mind that they're going to do it. We can't see into the future, but when that incident happens, the relationships are so important. It's the teachers and the coaches that are in the schools that have that relationship that prevent things on a daily basis, that prevent fights. They're the ones. Police should be used. There's a meme out there, and I really hate it. It has a guy that has a machete and he's going crazy, and it says, call your counselor now, call your social worker now. No, that's your job. When it gets to that level, that's your job. But there's something that could have been done probably to prevent that person from getting to that point. When they go past that point, then you can come in. The SROs are coming in long before. They don't know if a child is hungry. That's why they're acting out. They don't care if a child is being abused at home, and that's why they're acting out. That's why we have counselors, because they can get that information. But an SRO comes in, a child's being disruptive, hey, get them out. And that's the problem, because they're not trained in that type of thing, and they're trained in a different way. You had a kid that got suspended, arrested in a fight where he threw one punch. You had a kid that got arrested because he pulled papers off a bulletin board. That used to be go to the principal's office. Somehow we've gotten away from that. Somehow we've gotten away from the relationships.
Thank you. Yes. And the reason I brought that up, here in Dallas, we're talking about getting rid of exclusionary practices. And, that's becoming more of the way that we're trying to move the school culture. But, we're talking about people that focus on fear. So it's not that, how often are we having school shootings, which I can understand you being afraid of, and then how often is that school resource officer handling, like you said, kids pulling things off the board, kids that get into an argument doing kid things. So it's great to have to be wary or aware of violence in schools, but we need to talk about data. School shootings don't happen that often, and school and SROs are interacting and reacting to everyday school activities. And I personally don't think that's necessary, but I just want you to reiterate as an ex, as someone that came from that field, then that's not necessary, and that's not the right data.
Listen, the data shows us that the schools that have the shootings don't have the SROs. And the schools that aren't having the school shootings have the SROs in there arresting them. So and it's funny because I talk about the school to prison pipeline, and everybody thinks it's a metaphor. And for me, it's not a metaphor, it's a reality. This thing is designed into our laws, it's designed into our policies. This is why these things are happening. So it's bigger than, I got the shirt and I think it's cute, but it really is it's a reality for us.
Yes.
It's not a metaphor, it's a reality.
Yes, it is. It is. So I'm gonna now that we got that out of the way, I am gonna go into some of our questions that we talked about. So um, going off of what we just talked about and where we left off with, you actually mentioned implicit bias earlier. And I was going to say, what's the biggest contributing factor in the continuation of the school to prison pipeline, in your opinion?
When you think of a pipeline, you think it's not just one big long tube, it's sections. So you have the section of zero tolerance policies, you have the section of underfunded schools, you have the section of SROs. They're all sections, but the biggest contributing factor is our assumptions. Assumptions create all the resistance in a relationship. And if there's resistance in a relationship, I don't feel safe. And if I don't feel safe, I can't learn. 21st century teaching is all about relationships. We have to learn that. Um, it's really crazy to me that the so-called good kids, the one that sit still, the ones that are compliant, we'll keep those. But the other ones we'll throw away. It's permissible to remove those because they may do bad on tests. They make our numbers look bad, and we might not get funded because we're actually doing our job because we're here to help the ones that need the most help. But
Yes.
we want to keep the good ones, the so-called good ones, the ones that sit still in class. And that doesn't make a learner. Just because you can sit still, that makes you compliant, but that doesn't make you a learner. And that goes back to the SRO thing. Law enforcement is looking for compliance, where educators are looking for connections. Great educators have great connections. If
Thank you.
everybody can think back to a teacher that made them feel loved outside the classroom. Everybody knows that one teacher. There's a teacher that pops in your head. We need more of those teachers.
Yes, sir, we do. And I'm glad you made that delineation, because we're talking about good teachers. We're talking about teachers that understand where kids are coming from. We're talking about uh, just being culturally relevant and being, it's not even about cultural relevance, to the degree that if you can care and understand where someone's coming from, about actually caring about the kids that you're teaching, and that, like you said, being a learner, I think that will change. That'll get rid of half the issues that we have right there. And we do the same thing. We both fight for the end to the school to prison pipeline. And it's always amazing to me that education has become this square peg round hole. And if you don't fit into that round hole, you're out of there. And you mentioned that. And that's not learning. That's like you said, compliance.
We have to be courageous enough to confront ourselves sometimes. there's this box that we all have that everything about a person's in, and it comes in 4 stages. It's I know what I know. And for me, I was born and raised in New York. I'm intimately familiar with the smell, the sounds, the taste of New York in the late 60s and early 70s. I'm an expert on that. I could tell you all about that. Then there's I know what I don't know. And that's such a powerful box because that's where we ask questions. That's where we can learn because I don't know. I didn't know what it was like to go to college in the South. And I knew that. So I knew there was a learning process. I didn't just jump right in there. There was a learning process. I asked questions to people that were already there. That's such a powerful box. The next box is I think I know, but I don't know. And that's the dangerous box. That's where our prejudices lie. And those don't change unless we confront ourselves about it. We have to have that shift. Something has to happen that shifts us. And the last box is, you know, I'm a I'm not aware of what I'm not aware of. And that's just, there's certain things that we open our foot and we open our mouth and insert our foot. There's just those cultural faux pas. We can't know everything. I know when I worked in the prison system, I used to call guys chief all the time. It was just the thing that you did. It was something that you learned. And then a Native American guy approached me and he said, Mr. Webb, can you please not call me chief? It's an esteemed thing in my culture, and I've failed miserably to live up to it. Now I could have said, I'm not like that. Why you got to be so petty? But instead, I kept my mouth shut and I let him talk. And when he was finished, he said, "You know what? Just call me Inmate Johnson." And I said, "Nah, I'm not going to call you that. I'm just going to call you Mr. Johnson." And that transformation happened for me, but it didn't stop there because what had happened was I started calling everybody Mr. And that led them, and they were you couldn't believe the guys that were incarcerated that felt so respected by that because they knew somebody there saw them beyond the bars. And we have to do this. And I figured that out. And I said, we have to do the same thing for the kids. We have to see them beyond their circumstances, beyond the classroom. We have to see that sometimes even beyond the behavior.
Thank you. I'm going to say this. The reason I asked you on the show is because I consider you one of my mentors. You may not know that, but I follow when I learned about you, I read everything that I could. I looked, where I could on LinkedIn and saw what you were doing. But I remember sitting in a couple of webinars that you were not leading, but being a panelist on. And it's just the care that you showed that mirrored what it gives me something to believe in and to look up to and to work towards. And when you're saying that, I have a teaching that we're talking about that's avid, and it's about being accountable and being vulnerable. And what you just described is being vulnerable and being able to learn and not be afraid to make a mistake, not be afraid to ask questions of your students, of the people that you're in charge of. And it's not really that you're even in charge of them, that you're tasked to educate and lead. And leadership is a lot different than just being a boss,
Yeah.
right? So I'm grateful that you said that. I tell you, this next question is kind of crazy to me. Is it bad students or bad education that sustains the school to prison pipeline? I like your face.
Is neither. It's a bad
Okay.
system. It's a bad system that issues consequences. It's a bad system that focuses on compliance and not connections. Our system doesn't pull people up, it pushes people down. And it's a way that our society treats people that don't fit in. It's the system. But we've become so reliant on the system. And I was so hoping, the pandemic has been an awful thing, but I was so hoping that this would be a renaissance in education, that teachers would finally put the curriculum down for a minute, that teachers would focus on connections. And it hasn't happened. It's happened in some places, but it hasn't happened to the degree that I thought it would. And even just recently, it came out that in Florida, they're actually sending disciplinary behaviors to the sheriff's office. What's the need for that? You know, and you begin to think about these things. And then the other thing that really shook me was this push for testing. And I just thought, man, these companies that have these tests must really be lining somebody's pockets, because the last thing we should be thinking about is testing these kids that have been traumatized through this pandemic. It really boggles my mind. So it's not bad students. There are no bad students. There are no lazy students. They just haven't found that what they're good at yet. They haven't found, like a superhero. I love the new Superman TV show because he's teaching his son how to use his superpowers. And that's what we need to be doing with our kids. Okay, you're a little chatty. Okay, let's see how we can use this instead of saying shut up. You know, let's see how we can work this. A teacher once told Steve Harvey he needed to shut up. Look where Steve Harvey is.
Right.
You know, you have to think about these things, and we don't think about these things anymore. It's like you said, the square peg round hole. These zero tolerance policies are a response to misbehavior, and it doesn't give, and this is part of the system, and it doesn't give students an opportunity to learn from their mistakes. It doesn't give them an opportunity to make a better decision next time. It's make a mistake, you're out of my classroom.
And no, you know, the sad thing about it. So here with PEP, we're, you know, we try to start with middle school kids, but when you think about it, when you start labeling these kids in third, fourth, fifth grade, though, that follows them through their whole educational career. It's not like the kid leaves one school and gets a new chance. That record follows them, and they're seen, that's going from the whole feeder pattern. It's crazy that you have, and it's not the kid that is doing anything. And it's not, like you said, it's not even the education, it's the system that we're just creating this loop that we're falling into. And my next question goes off of what we're going to continue with that. So when we're talking school culture, and we've talked about like the issues, the problems, I want to move it towards solutions, right? So when we know how important school culture is, you mentioned that a little bit before about the principal leading it's his school. So talk to me about school culture and talk to me about solutions.
Just a little reflection on the last thing, to go back for a second.
Yes,
Think
sir.
about those kids who have older siblings and they walk through the door and the teacher says, "Oh, that's Johnny's little brother." You know what they get. You know what? You already have the solution because his older sibling went through. So you should already be problem solving. You
There you
shouldn't be
go.
labeling that as Johnny's little. Okay, I know what the problems are in the home already because I already had one kid go through. Now it's the time for problem solving. I have to get that out there because that's one of the
No, 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 no. You're right,
I,
man.
I
You're right.
hate when I hear an educator say, "Oh, that's so and so's little brother," because I know that that kid is already in a bad situation. They've already made an assumption about that kid. But
Yes.
man, school culture. When I think about that, I always think about, and it's so crazy how, and it may not, it's not even crazy how the prison system is a mirror to the educational system. And that's what was the biggest shock for me, to walk into schools, and I spent some time in an alternative school, and it was just a mirror of the prison system. And I remember always talking about wardens that didn't do certain things, that sat up in their office all day and left early. That created a culture. That created, if the warden's not doing these things, why am I doing these things? Why am I going the extra yard? And it starts with the principal. And I always tell people, they wanted the big money. It comes with that responsibility, and you're responsible for the culture. And
Yes.
I was out of school in Maryland, and when I entered, it said mistakes are allowed here. That's culture. That's
Yes.
culture. That's how important culture is, because when a kid walks in there, they feel safe. And when a kid feels safe, they can learn. A kid can't feel safe if, there's a police officer roaming around the building. Some people say that makes a kid feel safe because, but for the most part, the kids
No.
that look like us don't feel safe. I
No.
worked in law enforcement
Yeah.
27 years. I got pulled over a couple months ago. My heart was racing, and I got a retirement badge. So I still haven't gotten over the things that happened to me when I was 12 and 13 years old in the
Yes.
NYPD. So that's trauma. And if you can build a culture that can help, that trauma informed culture, that social and emotional learning culture, which and I'm going SROs don't have. I hate to emphasize that point, but they don't have that training. They don't have that.
No. They don't.
And children should be able to walk into a class and see themselves in the class. They should be able to see themselves in the curriculum. To me, that's the culture. You know, to me, the culture isn't, Black History Month and we talk about three people. That's not culture. I should walk into class September 13th and Thursday, September 13th. I can pick up a book in the library and find a book with a person that looks just like me.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. I hate to, I tried my best to stay away from that, but that is, I'm so worn out with Black History Month and with, that. And it's not just Black history, but we are talking because what we're talking about affects Black youth, and we're talking about racism, and we're talking about systemic racism and white supremacy. So we do have to focus on that. But there also should be an understanding of, like you said, the trauma that comes with a low socioeconomic status, or not really low, but just you're struggling with the issues that you're struggling with because of the system. And you have to understand how to work with those, with kids that are facing these issues, that are facing these problems and changing. And yeah, but me and Black History Month, we haven't been cool for quite some time. So
I, I had a teacher at one time who thought I was being lazy and bored in class. And the reason she thought that was because she thought I didn't have a father. And she thought that was the reason. And the reason I was lazy and bored was because I mastered your curriculum already
thank you.
and I
Ready?
needed to be challenged. And I got in trouble. And my father came to the school. You know, it, schools treat kids different when they don't feel like they have a village behind them. Schools will treat you different if they don't assume you have a village behind them. And she didn't think I had a village behind me, but I did. And
Yes.
the
Yes.
presence made a difference. And that's one of the things, that I do work with parents about. You got to be that parent. You got to be that parent that shows up. Now, you want to be heard and not seen. Some people take that the wrong way. That when you go into the building and you need to talk about an issue with your kid, whether it's an IEP or whatever the issue is, you want to be heard, not just seen. So make sure you're being smart about your interactions.
Yes. Yes. But then therein lies the other thing that we're kind of moving towards for those for those kids that, because of systemic issues, they don't have parents that are there. You know what I mean? They're missing the parents. One parent's gone. Uh, Parent has to work. So I'm a big proponent of community schools, actual community schools, getting community members involved, letting them come to class, mentorship, in school time mentorship. bringing bringing people in for the students that don't have that available, because as you said, if the teachers assume that, they're going to treat them a certain way, so there needs to be someone that comes in and can take up for that. I just Do you agree with more mentorship
A-
in schools?
Absolutely. The community school, the school should be the hub of everything, because we know we're not going to be able to get rid of the biases and the prejudices. Some people are stuck. Um, they're going to be kids that have Jordans on and are going to be on free and reduced lunch, and you're going to have that teacher that's going to feel a certain way about that, not knowing if those Jordans was a gift, or not knowing that they got them from the Goodwill, or wherever they got them from. They roll into their assumptions, and we can't prevent that. But community schoolings can be that bridge where you connect, you collaborate, and you create. You connect those academics, which are important, the health and social stuff that's important. You 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 collaborate with all the partners that you have in the community that can help out, and you create stronger families, which creates stronger kids, which creates a stronger community.
Yes.
And you get that. But there's resistance for some reason about community schoolings. You create active learning,
The system.
create.
It's
You
again back
also
to the
know
system.
families. When I have that social support, when I know where to go and it's easily accessible, all kids get to school somehow. If one thing, kids, the majority of them will get to school. So if those services were at the school, that's what you got to be, where the parents are. But if those services, if I'm a parent and I live in a rural area, if I'm a parent, I can't get to these places sometimes if I don't have the funds, if I'm not in that position to do that, if I don't have family members or somebody that's going to help me out to make those appointments. I need to get to those social services, but they were at the school, that community school idea. You can get them because that's where they are. They're dropping
Yes.
their kids off somehow. You're going to catch them.
Yes, that's true. Very true. Very true. I have actually like two questions that I really want to get to you with you. Um, we just talked about the community schooling, and this I know is going to take the remainder of our time, and I kind of wanted to. Um, Tell me what utopia would look like for you. What would utopia look like for you with school? Um, yeah, just what would it look like? Tell me what utopia would look like.
That's really difficult. It's simple, but it's not easy. But my school utopia would foster a sense of tolerance and inclusion. It would value connection over correction. It would value mastery over grades. And the components that it would have, it would establish an environment where relationships are centered. It would have a strong desire to see students reach their maximum potential. And when I say maximum potential, and I use that word a lot, I don't mean A's, I don't mean 4.0s, I mean their maximum potential as a person. We always say be the best you, or the best version of you. That's part of it. And the last thing I could think of would be promote the innovation. Get away from these curriculums and standardized tests. Promote innovation. Promote organized chaos sometimes, um, because that's how kids learn, especially our younger kids. If they embrace school at a young age, it makes it so much easier to keep them there. Uh, at least that's what I've found. There's a reason why places look at third grade reading levels to determine how many prisons need to be built. That's a discussion I like to have with elementary school kids, because they need to know why this is being done. Sometimes, it's just because, and we don't acknowledge how smart kids are sometimes and how much they understand things.
Yes.
And if I go into elementary school and I tell a kid, you're in this reading because if you don't know how to read by the fourth grade, this is what your life's going to look like. This is what people are banking on you to do. And we don't want that. We've had that discussion, but we don't have that discussion enough. We don't tell our kids the reason why we do stuff. And that would be part of my utopia, is to tell them this is why we do stuff. This is why we do this. This is why we focus on reading. We focus on reading because you know what? Your ancestors could have been killed to learn how to read. And that's why we focus on reading. You know, it costs lives to learn how to read at one time. One time it was illegal for somebody that looked like you to learn how to read. So we want to
Yeah.
honor that by
Yeah.
by helping you learn how to read and read well, and have that skill with you for a long time, because people sacrifice their lives so you can do this. The country was first, it started that way, and then they said separate but equal, and then when that didn't work, they said integrate, and that'll automatically make everything equal. And we've been more separate and unequal ever since. And that's the
Since
sad part about
integration. Yes.
it. That's
Yes.
the
Yes.
sad part about it.
Yeah.
And
It,
that's
it,
why I left the prison system, was because a mom had called me, and she had said, is this Mr. Webb? And I said, yeah. And she said her son's name, and I said, ma'am, he's been gone for like 3 years. And she said, Mr. Webb, he's been gone 5 years. He hadn't been locked up. I thought I was going to die with him in prison. And I sat down with him the other day and I said, what was different? And he said, I sat in Mr. Webb's office, and I never felt like I was locked up when I walked into his office. And we didn't just talk. He played music. We talked about different things. We didn't just talk about, drug programs and things like that. And she said, I just wanted to thank you. But really what I wanted to tell you was, I know you probably get paid a lot of money to do what you do, but wouldn't it be better to keep young men out of prison rather than help men not come back to prison? And that's the reason why I started this. That was, that was the real push that I needed to make that shift, because for a long time I was locked into that, the law enforcement and the government, the good government job and all that kind of stuff. I was locked into that. I was going to retire and have this 401k, and all this kind of stuff. And she told me that. And, sometimes God sends you messages until you hear them.
Yeah.
And I had that message when I look back, when I was thinking about the guys coming into my classroom and the guys coming into my prison. I was getting that message, but I wasn't listening. And she finally helped me listen and meet people like you and be able to go around the country and speak on this. So it's been a blessing.
Man, I really appreciate it. Karen says, I think one of the most damaging things to kiddos in Texas public schools is the discipline records that are required to be reported to the state. Schools are mandated to report certain discipline issues. And yes, they are. And um, that's a long road to hoe. But, you know, again, we're talking about Karen, we're talking about zero tolerance practices and policies. And we're talking about a culture of education that, as he said, it's about compliance and control. It really is not about education or learning. And that's what most advocates are fighting for. It's not a revamping of the system, it's destroying the system and creating something totally new. That's like Mr. Webb said, innovative. And innovation comes with doing something totally new. It does not mean fixing something that we know is broken. And you know, I would say your voice matters, and that's what they make school boards for, and that's what we go to while we go to the Texas legislature. So your voice is needed, your thoughts are needed, and people need to hear that. Um, but Mr. Webb, I want to thank you so much for joining me. I want to say thank you for the work that you do and continue to do that. Thank you for your heart, and I'm glad that I'm doing the same thing you're doing. You give me something to work towards. You're always supposed to be in the room with somebody that makes you feel silly, and the things that and I appreciate you making me feel silly, so that I have something to grow to and to change. But
Iron sharpens iron, brother. You sharpen me as well. I keep an eye out for you and what you're doing. I love the pep talk and the things you've been doing. So there's a reason why we connected, and you sharpen me just as much. It's a pleasure to know that there are allies out there. Uh, Not enough, but
not enough, but yes, we're moving. We're moving. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. That's going to be our show. Uh, you can find Mr. Webb. Let's do some shameless plugs. Talk about where you are, what you're doing, what's coming up, so that people know how to get in touch with you, and you can change some more lives.
yeah, I'm on any social media. It's Webvolutionary, WEBBOLUTIONARY. You can find me on social media there. My website is in the school to prison pipeline.com. The two in the school to prison is the number two, like my shirt, in the school to prison pipeline.com. Future, I'm working on a couple local projects dealing with implicit bias and also dealing with uh, kids that have been identified as attendance issues. So working with them to get them back in school, working on getting young people grants to go to college that are um, who could be first-time college students for their families and break that generational curse, who may not have the funds in the home to get to. So I'm finding those grants for those kids and making sure that their attendance and behavior and their coursework is right on track so they can get that money to to make better lives for generations to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Um, Join us. That's like I said, that's going to be our show. Join us next time on the 24th, March 24th. It's going to be restored. We're going to talk about restorative justice. Is it the future of discipline? Um, and that's going to be with Alicia Castillo. I really appreciate you guys joining me tonight. Thank you, Mr. Webb, for coming on.
Thank you.
Continue doing your great work, and you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you. You have a good night.